God is still working through you, no matter your age. There is a quiet lie that creeps into the heart as the years pass. It doesn't arrive all at once. It settles slowly, whispering that your best days are behind you, that your usefulness has faded, that God now works through younger, stronger, faster people. It tells you that mistakes disqualified you, that time ran out, that what you have left is too small to matter. And if you're not careful, that lie can sound convincing, especially when the world celebrates youth and speed, but rarely honors faithfulness and endurance. But Scripture tells a very different story. The Bible does not portray age as a limitation. It reveals it as a vessel. God has never been restricted by years, seasons, or human timelines. He is not intimidated by your past, surprised by your present, or uncertain about your future. When God looks at you, he does not see a number. He sees a calling that is still alive. God has always worked through people who thought their moment had passed. Moses was called when his confidence was gone. Abraham was promised fruitfulness when his body said otherwise. Anna worshipped and prayed into old age and was among the first to recognize the Messiah. Paul finished his race not by slowing down in faith, but by pouring out everything he had left with joy. The common thread was never age, it was availability. This message is not about pretending time hasn't changed you. It's about recognizing that God still wants you right where you are. Your strength may look different now, but your faith can be deeper. Your role may have shifted, but your influence can be greater. God doesn't discard his servants when seasons change. He redeploys them. If you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or quietly sidelined by life, this message is for you. Not to stir regret, but to awaken purpose. Because as long as you are breathing, God is still working. And there are important things that he still needs you to do, no matter your age. Number 1, God still needs your faith, not your strength. One of the greatest misconceptions believers carry into later seasons of life is the idea that usefulness to God is measured by physical strength, speed, or visibility. Scripture consistently dismantles that belief. God has never depended on human strength to accomplish divine purpose. He has always depended on faith, and faith, unlike physical ability, does not diminish with age, it deepens. Faith is refined through years of walking with God, through prayers answered and prayers delayed, through victories and laws, through obedience when it was costly and trust when it was uncomfortable. Younger believers may have energy, but seasoned believers have perspective. They know what it means to trust God when outcomes are uncertain, when bodies are tired, when circumstances do not cooperate. That kind of faith carries weight. Moses did not lead Israel out of Egypt in his youth. He did it after years of failure, obscurity, and humility. Abraham did not receive his promise when his strength was at its peak, but when faith was all he had left. Scripture shows again and again that when strength fades, faith becomes the primary instrument God uses. Weakness does not disqualify, it often creates space for God's power to be seen more clearly. God still needs your faith, because faith anchors others. Your quiet trust speaks loudly in a world ruled by anxiety. Your steady reliance on God becomes a testimony that sustains younger generations who are still learning how to endure. When you trust God without needing to see everything change, you reveal the depth of your relationship with Him. Faith is not passive. It is active trust. It prays when outcomes are unclear. It hopes when timelines stretch. It believes when emotions waver. And God honors that kind of faith deeply. Scripture tells us that without faith it is impossible to please God. Not without strength, not without productivity, not without visibility. If you feel weaker than you once did, don't assume God needs you less. He may need you more. Faith matured through years of walking with God carries authority that cannot be rushed. and God still has work to do through hearts that know how to trust Him completely. Number 2. God still needs your obedience, even when the assignment changes. Another lie that creeps in with time is the belief that obedience only matters when assignments are large, visible, or familiar. But Scripture shows us that obedience is not about position. It is about posture. God does not stop calling His people to obedience as seasons change. He simply reshapes what obedience looks like. Earlier in life, obedience may have looked like building, leading, traveling, striving, or pioneering. Later, it may look like mentoring, praying, listening, waiting, or finishing well. The assignment changes, but the call to obedience does not. God values obedience in every form, not just the kind that draws attention. Scripture is full of people whose most meaningful obedience came after their role shifted. Samuel transitioned from prophet to mentor. David prepared Solomon more than he expanded territory. Paul, near the end of his life, focused on encouragement, letters, and spiritual covering. Their obedience did not shrink, it matured. God still needs your obedience, because obedience is how His will continues moving through generations. Obedience in later seasons often happens quietly. It happens when no one is watching. It happens when applause has faded. And that kind of obedience is precious to God. This obedience requires humility. It means accepting that God's work through you may look different than before. It means trusting that unseen obedience matters as much as visible achievement. Scripture reminds us that God sees in secret and rewards faithfully. If your assignment has changed, do not mistake that for irrelevance. God is still working through your yes. Obedience offered without recognition, without urgency, and without pressure carries deep spiritual weight, and God still needs that obedience to shape what comes next. Because obedience is never seasonal, it is lifelong. And God still calls His people to walk faithfully, no matter their age. Number 3. God still needs your voice to speak wisdom. As time passes, one of the most valuable gifts God places within a believer is wisdom. Wisdom shaped by experience, suffering, patience, and long obedience. Scripture never treats wisdom as secondary. In fact, it elevates it. Wisdom is not simply knowledge gained over time, it is truth tested in real life. And God still needs your voice to speak that kind of wisdom into a world desperate for it. Your voice carries something that cannot be taught in a classroom or learned quickly. It carries discernment formed through mistakes, grace discovered through failure, and faith refined through endurance. You've seen God move when things looked impossible. You've learned what matters and what fades. That perspective is not incidental. It is purposeful. The Bible is filled with moments where wisdom, spoken at the right time, changed everything. Eli's guidance helped Samuel recognize God's voice. Naomi's counsel shaped Ruth's future. Paul's letters, written later in life, continue to instruct the church centuries later. These voices were not loud, flashy, or young, but they were necessary. God still needs your voice, because wisdom stabilizes what enthusiasm alone cannot sustain. Younger believers may have passion, but they need direction. They need someone who can say, "I've been there, and God was faithful." Your words can anchor faith when emotions waver. They can prevent unnecessary detours. They can speak peace into confusion. You may feel hesitant to speak because the culture celebrates novelty more than depth. But God's kingdom does not operate on trends. It operates on truth, and wisdom speaks truth without needing to impress. Sometimes God uses a single sentence spoken gently to accomplish more than years of activity. Your voice may not be on a platform. It may be in a conversation, a prayer, a message, a moment of listening, followed by insight. That is still ministry. Scripture tells us that wise counsel is a blessing and a safeguard. God still needs your voice because wisdom protects what God is building. Do not silence yourself out of humility. that borders on fear. If God has taught you, healed you, carried you, or corrected you, then what He's placed within you is meant to be shared. Wisdom is not meant to be stored. It is meant to be spoken, and God still needs your voice to speak life, truth, and clarity into the lives of others. Number 4. God still needs your prayer life to shape the future. There are assignments in God's kingdom that cannot be seen, measured, or applauded, but they are among the most powerful. Prayer is one of them. Scripture makes it clear that intercession is never passive. It is active partnership with God. And as seasons change, God often increases a believer's influence through prayer rather than activity. God still needs your prayers, because prayer shapes what hands may never touch. You may no longer be in the center of action, but you are still standing in the gap. Your prayers carry authority, because they are rooted in faith proven over time. You know how to pray with patience, not panic, with trust, not demand, with endurance, not haste. Throughout the Bible, prayer from seasoned believers altered the course of history. Anna prayed faithfully for decades and recognized the Messiah when he arrived. Moses interceded when Israel failed and altered God's response. Paul prayed continually for the churches long after he could no longer visit them. Their prayers did not diminish with age. They intensified. Prayer becomes deeper when it is no longer rushed. You pray less for outcomes and more for alignment. You pray less from fear and more from trust. You understand that God works beyond what you can see, and that shapes how you intercede. That kind of prayer carries weight. God still needs your prayer life, because prayer covers generations you may never meet. It protects futures you may never witness. It prepares paths others will walk. Scripture tells us that the prayers of the righteous are powerful and effective, not because of volume or eloquence, but because of relationship. You may feel unseen in this role, but heaven sees, God listens, and history is shaped by prayers offered faithfully in quiet places. If you wonder whether your life still matters to God's work, remember this: prayer is never obsolete. As long as God is moving, prayer is needed. And God still needs you to pray, not as a last resort, but as a vital part of His own work in the world. Number 5. God still needs your example of endurance. There is a kind of ministry that cannot be rushed, staged, or manufactured. It is the ministry of endurance, the quiet testimony of someone who has walked with God through changing seasons and remained faithful. Scripture places immense value on this kind of witness. Endurance is not dramatic, but it is powerful. And God still needs your example of it. Endurance is faith that stayed when it would have been easier to leave. It is obedience that continued when prayers were unanswered and outcomes uncertain. It is love that remained steady when life disappointed. The Bible reminds us that endurance produces character, and character produces hope. That hope is not theoretical, it is visible in a life that has not quit. You may not realize how much your endurance speaks. People notice when someone continues to trust God after loss, disappointment, or delay. They notice when faith doesn't collapse under pressure. They notice when someone finishes the race with integrity instead of bitterness. That kind of faith teaches without preaching. Scripture shows us that finishing well matters deeply to God. Paul spoke often about completing his course faithfully, not about speed, not about applause, about faithfulness. God is not only concerned with how you start, He cares about how you endure. And your endurance becomes a blueprint for others who are still learning how to stay. In a world that values quick results and constant change, endurance stands out. It says God is worthy even when circumstances are not ideal. It says faith is not conditional. It says hope can last. Younger believers need to see that kind of faith lived out. They need proof that trusting God long-term is possible. God still needs your endurance because it guards against discouragement in others. Your steady walk reminds people that God does not abandon his people halfway through their story. Endurance testifies that God sustains not just temporarily, but for a lifetime. If you feel like your faithfulness goes unnoticed, remember that God sees it and he uses it. Your endurance may be shaping someone's faith right now, even if you never hear about it. God still needs your example because staying faithful to the end glorifies him deeply. Number 6. God still needs your willingness to grow. One of the most subtle lies people believe as they grow older is that spiritual growth has a finish line, that learning is for the young, that transformation slows with age. But Scripture never supports that idea. As long as you are alive, God is still shaping you, and he still needs your willingness to grow. Spiritual growth is not about keeping up. It is about staying open. God continues to refine hearts regardless of age. He reveals new layers of truth, new depths of humility, new expressions of trust. Growth may look different now, but it is no less necessary. In fact, it often becomes more meaningful. The Bible shows us that God continues teaching his people throughout their lives. David prayed for a teachable heart even after becoming king. Paul spoke of still pressing forward despite his maturity in faith. Scripture celebrates those who remain pliable in God's hands. God still needs your willingness to grow because stagnation hardens the heart. Growth keeps it soft. A teachable spirit allows God to correct, heal, and refine you continually. It prevents pride. It deepens humility. It keeps intimacy alive. Growth in later seasons often looks like letting go of control, of expectations, of old wounds, assumptions. It may look like forgiving more freely, trusting more deeply, listening more attentively. These are not small things. They are profound. When you remain willing to grow, you model humility for others. You show that faith is not about arriving, but about abiding. God still needs that posture in his people. A heart that says, Lord, I'm still listening, still learning, still willing. As long as you are breathing, God is still working. And your willingness to grow keeps you aligned with what he is doing now, not what he did then. Number 7. God still needs your yes, right where you are. At the heart of every calling God has ever given is a simple response, yes. Not a perfect yes. Not a loud yes. Just a willing one. Scripture shows us that God's work has never depended on ideal conditions, perfect timing, or flawless people. It has always depended on availability. And God still needs your yes right where you are. Your yes today may not look like it once did. It may not come with travel, leadership, or visibility. It may come quietly, in faithfulness, consistency, and surrender. But it matters no less. God does not measure obedience by scale. He measures it by sincerity. A yes offered in this season carries the weight of everything God has already walked you through. Throughout the Bible, God used people who said yes long after they thought their moment had passed. Moses said yes after decades in obscurity. Abraham said yes when his body had aged and his future looked impossible. Isaiah said yes without knowing the outcome. Mary said yes without understanding the cost. God has always moved through willing hearts, not perfect circumstances. Your yes today may mean continuing to trust when life feels quieter. It may mean mentoring one person instead of many. It may mean praying faithfully when no one sees. It may mean surrendering expectations and embracing obedience without recognition. That yes still moves heaven. God still needs your yes because his work is ongoing. His kingdom is still advancing. His people are still being shaped. And your obedience, however small it may feel, fits into a larger story you may never fully see. Scripture reminds us that God weaves obedience together across generations. If you felt hesitant to say yes again because you fear insignificance, hear this clearly. God has never asked for relevance, only faithfulness. He is not done with you. He has not moved on. He has not replaced you. He is still inviting you to partner with him. Saying yes right where you are is an act of trust. It says, God, I may not have what I once did, but I still have myself. And God honors that offering deeply, because availability has always been more powerful than ability. Conclusion: your purpose didn't expire. The world may measure value by speed, strength, and visibility, but God measures it by faithfulness, obedience, and love. Scripture leaves no room for the idea that purpose has an expiration date. As long as God gives you breath, he still has intention for your life. Your season did not end because it changed. It simply evolved. God has not been watching the years pass, waiting to move on from you. He has been walking with you through every stage, shaping your faith, deepening your wisdom, and preparing you for the work that fits who you are now. Nothing you've lived through was wasted. Nothing you've learned is irrelevant. Nothing you still carry is insignificant. If you've believed the lie that your usefulness has faded, today is an invitation to release it. God still needs your faith, your obedience, your prayers, your endurance, your willingness to grow. And most of all, he still needs your yes, not yesterday's yes. Today's. You don't need to go backward to be used by God. You don't need to reclaim old roles or recreate past seasons. You simply need to offer the present moment to him. God specializes in working with what is available now. Let this message awaken something in you. Not regret for what has passed, but hope for what remains. If God is still calling, still drawing, still stirring your heart, it's because he is not finished, and he never wastes a willing life. So say yes again, right where you are, right as you are, and trust that God will do what he has always done. Take surrendered hearts and turn them into vessels of lasting purpose.